They stepped out expecting cages and chains, but what they found instead was something far more dangerous than any prison ever built. When the train finally slowed and the grinding wheels screamed against the rails, not a single man inside the cattle car dared to move. The silence was thick, heavy, suffocating like the breath before a storm. 8 days locked in darkness had turned rumors into reality. Inside their minds, every whisper, every story, every half-truth had painted the same picture, waiting outside a brutal camp wrapped in barbed wire towers, rising like threats into the sky. Guards with rifles ready to punish, defeat, and strip away whatever dignity remained. No. One wanted to be the first to face it. Then the doors slid open, and light crashed into the darkness, like an explosion of truth blinding. Harsh, unstoppable. The men flinched, not from pain, but from fear. Because light meant arrival, and arrival meant judgment. A voice followed, calm, steady, almost careless, calling them out as if they were workers at the end of a shift, not prisoners of war. There was no shouting, no barking orders, no violence in tone, only a simple command. Step out, bring your things. That was the first crack in everything they believed. Otto Weiss moved first, not because he was fearless, but because the weight of waiting had become unbearable. His boots hit the ground, and he braced himself for impact, for the sight of guns, for the cold stare of enemies ready to dominate him. But none of it came. What stood before him was something his mind refused to accept: low wooden barracks resting quietly under open sky, a cookhouse breathing smoke into the air, a Ghanaian medical hut standing plain and still, stacks of firewood waiting for winter, rows of wash barrels catching sunlight like ordinary objects in an ordinary place. And then the truth struck him harder than any weapon ever could. There was no fence, no barbed wire, no walls, no towers, nothing to stop a man from walking away. The absence screamed louder than any prison ever could. Otto stood frozen, his eyes scanning the horizon again and again, as if the missing barrier would suddenly appear. If he looked hard enough behind him, more prisoners dropped from the train, their movements slow, uncertain, like men stepping into a trap. They could not see. One bumped into Otto and asked, "What is it?" But Otto could not answer, because there were no words for this kind of confusion. All he could do was point, and soon dozens stood in the dirt, their bags forgotten, their thoughts unraveling as they stared at the same impossible reality. Open land stretching wide, a valley breathing silence, dark pine trees in the distance, rolling hills fading into a pale sky, a dirt road leading away, as if inviting them to leave, as if daring them to try. One man whispered, "Where is the camp?" Another answered with a hollow voice, "This is the camp." A ripple of laughter broke out, but it carried no humor, only fear, because they all understood something was deeply wrong. This was not how captivity was supposed to look. A tall blonde prisoner muttered, "You mean we can just walk?" Nearby guard overheard him and shrugged casually, saying, "You can walk around, just do not cause trouble. No warning, no threat, just indifference." And that indifference unsettled them more than cruelty ever could, because cruelty was predictable. Cruelty made sense. But this calm, this openness, this quiet confidence, it planted something far more dangerous inside. Their minds' doubt. The men were lined up, counted, and led into barracks that were clean, organized, almost welcoming. Each bunk prepared blankets, folded a stove, waiting in the center, schedules written neatly on the wall, listing meals, work, duties, washing times, medical checks. Everything was structured, but nothing spoke of punishment. Nothing spoke of confinement. Nothing explained what would happen if a man simply chose to walk away. That night they sat together, eating thick stew, bread and potatoes. No one complained. No one spoke loudly. Even the most restless among them felt the weight of something they could not explain. Otto leaned closer to Deer, his voice low, tense. "This is wrong." Deer looked at him, tearing bread. "What part?" Otto whispered. "All of it. No fence means they are certain we cannot escape." But why? His eyes shifted toward the distant trees, now dark and silent, like a barrier made of shadows. Because of the wilderness, the cold, the distance, or because every person here would recognize us? In minutes, An older man named France listened quietly, then shook his head and said something that silenced them all. "It is worse than that. It means they do not need to frighten us." Those words settled deep, heavier than chains that night. Sleep did not come easily. Every creak, every gust of wind felt like a hidden test. Men rose from their bunks again and again to stare outside, hoping to finally see the fence that would make sense of everything. But there was only open ground under pale moonlight, and that openness pressed against their thoughts like a question with no answer. By the second week, the routine began to take hold. They worked in groups, cutting timber, repairing roads, unloading supplies, helping on nearby farms. Guards were present but distant, their rifles carried without urgency, their voices calm, almost friendly. And that normalcy began to erode the fear in a different way. One afternoon, Otto and others loaded grain near a farm. Far from camp, the nearest guard stood far away, smoking, talking casually with the farmer. Deer paused and looked across the wide-open field stretching endlessly. "You see that," he said. Otto answered without looking. "I see it." Deer wiped his face. "We could be in those trees before anyone stops us." Otto said nothing, because both of them knew the truth. Beyond the trees lay miles of unknown land, cold, unforgiving, filled with strangers speaking a language that would expose them instantly even if they ran, even if they reached safety for a moment. What then? No papers, no map, no allies, no future, just survival. Turning into another prison. The thought lingered stronger than any wall, and that was when they began to understand the real design of the camp. It was not built to hold their bodies. It was built to trap their choices. The moment a man realizes the door is open is the moment he understands he was never truly locked in. Days turned into weeks and weeks, stretched into something heavier than time itself, something that pressed quietly against the mind. The camp remained unchanged. No fences, no walls, no visible force holding anyone in place. Yet something invisible, stronger than iron, had begun to settle inside the men. It crept into their routines, their conversations, their silence. It shaped the way they looked at the horizon, and the way they avoided looking at it. The guards never tightened control. They did not need to. Their calm presence, their unshaken certainty created a pressure that no threat could ever match. Work details continued. Timber fell under steady hands. Roads took shape beneath worn boots. Supplies moved from truck to storage with mechanical precision, and on nearby farms, prisoners labored under open sky where escape was not just possible, it was visible every second. The land stretched endlessly, fields rolling outward like an invitation, forests standing dark and deep like a promise of disappearance, yet no one moved. Not truly, not beyond a glance, not beyond a thought that quickly died under the weight of reality. Then came the story that spread like fire through dry wood. A man had tried it, not with violence, not with desperation, but with quiet intention. He had simply drifted away during a logging task, stepped beyond sight, slipped into the trees and vanished. For a moment, that single act shook the entire camp because it broke the illusion that no one would dare. For hours, whispers moved from bunk to bunk, voices low, urgent, filled with a strange mixture of hope and dread. Some believed he would reach freedom, cross into another country, start a new life. Others saw only a slow death in the wilderness. Hunger, cold, isolation, turning courage into regret. And then 2 days later, the truth arrived, not in whispers, but in plain sight. A truck rolled into camp, and in the back sat the man wrapped in a blanket, his head lowered, not in defiance but in quiet defeat. His clothes were damp, his face pale, his strength drained, not by punishment, but by reality. He had walked away from the camp, but he had not escaped the world beyond it. He had made it only a short distance before exhaustion, and hunger forced him into a small store where language and circumstance exposed him instantly. He had tried to buy food with coins that meant nothing, and the shopkeeper had responded, not with fear, not with anger, but with simple action, offering him food and calling the authorities. The return was almost gentle, and that gentleness struck harder than any blow. The entire camp watched as he stepped down, expecting consequences, expecting an example. to be made. But the commandant approached with calm authority, studied him for a moment and asked a question that cut deeper than punishment. "Did you enjoy your walk?" The man could not answer with pride. He could not claim victory. All he could offer was the truth. No. And that truth echoed through every man watching because it carried something undeniable. The commandant ordered food for him and sent him back to duty, as if nothing had happened. No chains, no isolation, no spectacle, just quiet acceptance. And that moment changed everything, because it destroyed the last illusion of rebellion there was. No enemy to fight, no cruelty to resist, no visible force to overcome, only a system built on understanding human limits. The barracks that night were filled with restless energy voices, clashing ideas colliding. Some insisted it was a trick, a calculated act, designed to lull them into obedience. Others argued it was something else entirely, something deeper, something that could not be easily explained. France listened, as always, silent, thoughtful, then spoke with a calm certainty that silenced the room. "This place does not need to control us with fear, because it controls us with reality." His words settled into the air like a truth no one wanted. But everyone felt winter arrived early, and with it came a transformation. The valley disappeared beneath a blanket of white. The open land became even more unforgiving. The absence of fences now felt almost absolute, because nature itself had become the barrier. Cold wind cut through clothing, snow swallowed paths, distance stretched further under endless white skies. The camp no longer resembled any prison. It looked like a small, isolated village surviving within a vast, indifferent world. One morning, during a wood-cutting detail, a young local boy approached, curious, unafraid. His eyes moved across the prisoners, studying them not as enemies, not as monsters, but as something ordinary. He asked, "Are these the prisoners?" And when the guard confirmed it, the boy frowned slightly and said, "They look like regular men." Those words struck Otto harder than anything before, because they broke another layer of belief. The war had drawn lines clear, and absolute enemies, and allies, good and evil. But here, in this place, those lines blurred into something uncomfortable, something human. Otto carried that moment with him. It followed him through work, through meals, through long, silent nights. At first, it angered him. Then it unsettled him. And finally, it forced him to confront a truth he had never considered. Perhaps the war had never been as simple as he believed. Perhaps the real conflict was not just between nations, but within the minds of those who fought it. One Sunday after chapel, Otto stood beside France, watching smoke rise slowly into the cold sky. The world felt still, almost peaceful, and that peace felt more unsettling than chaos ever had. France spoke quietly, asking if Otto understood why there were no fences. Otto gave a dry answer, "Because no one gets far." France nodded slightly, but then added something deeper. "The fence is not built around us. It exists in everything, beyond us, in the distance, in the cold, in the language, in the knowledge that survival out there requires more than courage. It requires belonging, something we do not have." Otto looked toward the open road stretching away, untouched, and felt the weight of those words settle inside him. The idea of escape no longer felt like freedom. It felt like surrender to something far harsher than captivity. Spring eventually came, melting the snow, revealing the same open land, the same endless horizon. New prisoners arrived, carrying the same fears, the same expectations, stepping off trains, ready to face brutality, only to be confronted with something far more complex: confusion, disbelief, silence, as they searched for walls that did not exist. And in that moment, Otto saw himself as he had been standing frozen, staring at the absence of a fence, realizing that sometimes the most powerful prison is not built with iron or wire, but with understanding. Years later, when war had faded into memory, and time had softened its edges, many details would disappear. The cold, the hunger, the endless routine would blur into fragments, but one image would remain sharp, unchanging. The moment the train doors opened, the light pouring in, and the realization that no barrier stood between him and the world, And that realization had carried a truth, more unsettling than captivity itself. Freedom is not simply the absence of walls. Sometimes it is the presence of limits you cannot cross. And in that understanding, Otto had faced something far greater than imprisonment he had faced. The quiet, undeniable reality that not every open road leads to escape.